Hey, how's everybody doing? Good to see you. Hi, Andre. Welcome to class, Mel G. Welcome to class. Fantastic. I'm glad to hear that, Melanie. We missed you in webinar yesterday afternoon. I did notice. We were talking about raising children to feel secure. Did you see any of the video? Did you happen to watch any of the videos? I hope you did. Oh my goodness, only 4 people today. Small crowd. Oh, you had to work. Oh, cool. Okay. Well, I'm glad it was work and not feeling well. That was the reason you didn't come there. It's good to see you. Anybody else here want to check in today? Shashon, are you here? Go ahead and send me a text on Remind if you want to check in. Are you the one who's going as Henry's mom on Remind? Fantastic. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I'm glad you did watch the videos. Cool. Fantastic. All right, let's see. Let's go ahead and get started, if you will. So today we're talking about Chapter 6, Socio-Emotional Development in Infancy. If you remember, I mentioned to you that this is the third part of the discussion regarding what happens in infancy. So next week we'll be going on to the next age group and we'll be back to biological and physical development. So today we're going to talk a little bit about John Bowlby and the beginnings of attachment theory. We're going to talk about Konrad Lorenz and imprinting. We're going to talk about Harry Harlow's monkeys. We're going to talk about John Bowlby's insights into the parent-child relationship, the early childhood relationship. Then we're going to talk about Harry Harlow and his monkeys. And then what I'd like to do is talk about one of John Bowlby's most famous collaborators. We're going to talk about Mary Ainsworth and the strange situation task and how she identified different types of attachment styles. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the positive impacts associated with secure attachment styles. And actually, I will talk a little bit about some of the critiques of attachment theory. All right, so if we don't have any questions, let's go ahead and move on. So, John Bowlby was a British psychiatrist. He actually had an MD, a medical doctorate, and he also was a psychoanalyst. So he combined the best of brain and neurology and mind back before it was fashionable. Very impressive early young psychologist who was given several positions in hospitals in Britain in the late 30s and early 40s, where he treated children who were affected by the war and separations that occurred as a result of the war. Now, when your country's being bombed and you're in the middle of a war, people do get separated, and sometimes young children are ripped away from their parents. And he became interested in this concept. Now, he was actually really impressed by a fellow named Konrad Lorenz. Anybody ever heard of Konrad Lorenz and the concept of imprinting? Anybody ever heard of imprinting before? If you have, please go ahead and type in the chat bar. You'll see Konrad Lorenz, a picture of Konrad Lorenz right behind me, and you'll notice that he is followed by a group of little ducklings, and they are following him as if he was their duck mom. Konrad Lorenz and some early ethologists were the first to document the fact that there appears to be a critical period in human beings, a critical period in animals where they will attach to the first thing that they are exposed to. So in Konrad Lorenz's case, what he would do is he would be there, and when these gray goslings would hatch, he would be there and he would be the one tending them from the time they were born until they grew up, and he was the only face they saw. And what he could show is these ducks would quickly accept him as if he was their mother, and he would walk around and they would follow him just like the little baby ducks would follow their own mother. And when he'd go swimming, they would swim with him. And he sort of demonstrated that there appeared to be some sort of critical period for picking a primary caregiver. Now, in his work, he worked with a lot of boys who had behavioral problems and sort of conduct disorder related problems. And he noticed a very interesting pattern. It seemed like the boys who had trouble were more likely to experience prolonged separation from their primary caregivers before the age of 5. And so he became interested in the idea that maybe there was something sort of innate and natural going on early in a child's life that, if disrupted, could lead to behavioral and psychiatric problems. Now, he actually wrote, he got famous enough that he was asked to write a report for the World Health Organization in 1951, and it was called Maternal Care and Mental Health. And in this, he argued about the importance for the need for a close mother-child relationship during the first couple of years of life. Now, you may say, duh, Chris, that's obvious, but back in the 1940s, this was not common knowledge. It wasn't understood how fundamentally important the relationship between a primary caregiver and a baby was during the first couple of years. Now, this report was actually quite controversial because the behaviorists were absolutely convinced that the mother did not matter at all. Instead, the thing that was important was that somebody was feeding the organism. So according to the behaviorists, if the baby was, as long as the baby was fed, there would be no need for it to develop an attachment with a primary caregiver. The psychoanalysts that Bowlby had been trained for, they also hated this idea too, because they were convinced, like Freud was, that really what was important were the fantasies that were going on inside, the psychosexual fantasies that were going on inside this infant's mind. And you know what? People even use this report for political purposes to argue that women shouldn't be allowed into the workforce because it would harm the infant. So there were lots of people who sort of had problems and uses for this very important WHO report that was written in the 1950s. All right. Now, what he did document was a process by which he thought a child went through a process of attachment. And you'll see it described right here. He argued that attachment goes through 4 phases. He argued that for the first 2 months of life, a child basically directs their attachment to any human figures. Remember from last week, we showed how humans prefer infant faces and no human voices even on the day that they're born. And so he argued that this sort of caused them to want to direct their attention to any human figure. Now, he argued that sometime in the first half of the year, towards the middle half of the first year, they move to a second stage where they pick one specific individual to attach to. And in John Bowlby's time, that was always considered the mom, because that's typically how it was back then. And he argued then a kid goes through a third age where they develop attachments with different figures that are important. So the mom first, then the dad, then maybe baby brothers and sisters and stuff like that. And so with increased locomotions, baby actively seek out contact with these different regular caregivers. So he's got this process of attachment occurring. And he argues that this attachment and developing these relationships then lead children to begin to understand that other people might have feelings like they do and their goals, and to develop, if you will, a sense of empathy. And what he found with these boys, these juvenile delinquents, is that a lot of them maybe didn't have these sort of empathetic understanding of other people. And what he argued was that during this stage, children develop an internal working model of how relationships are supposed to go. If my mom takes care of me and she's there and gives me the nurturing, then I learn to understand that there is the possibility for this kind of love relationship. If you'll remember from the Wednesday webinar, and I showed a couple of videos that you didn't see, Mel, if the child is brought up and is neglected, as I showed you in the video on reactive attachment development, the infant may learn that it's not possible to get comfort from other human beings and may find it impossible to develop relationships. So Bowlby thought it was very important during this period in that the child was learning a model of how human relationships were going to go. You know, right, that was seen as something for little babies and not for grown-ups. You're right. And we're going to talk about sort of sex stereotypes and the developing of gender identity in chapter 8 coming up. Not next chapter, but the chapter after that. That's a very good point to make, Melanie. Now, but one of the things and sort of the question that Bowlby couldn't ask was, what happens if a child isn't brought up with that kind of attachment? That's not something you can sort of test experimentally with babies. What does the quality of the mom matter? Is it all about food, or is it about some sort of comfort and attachment? This was the experiment that Bowlby couldn't do on humans because it was unethical. Now, there is a psychologist who decided to see if he could replicate this experimental setup or create an experimental setup to test this question with monkeys. And his name was Harry Harlow. And I'm sure all of you have heard the story of Harry Harlow. And he was asking the question, what is the nature of this bond between the parent and the child? So Bowlby shows that it's important and it has consequences, but why does this relationship develop? What's important about this relationship? Now, in 1940, the common explanation was that the mother provides food, provides a positive reinforcement in the way of food. And children like the mom because the mom feeds them. Now, the implications of this is that the mother-child bond is not important. Instead, it all relates to whether or not the child's physiological needs are met. So in this case, as long as the child's getting fed, there should be no ill effects of not being brought up with a mom. So Harry Harlow created an experiment where he took these monkeys and separated them from their moms at birth. And he put them in a cage alone with 2 wire mothers. Now, one of the wire mothers was covered in soft terry cloth, kind of like the picture that you see right underneath me. Do you see how this monkey is snuggling on this soft, cushy, warm mom? Now, right beside that mom, he would put the same wire robot monkey, but he would take the soft covering off of that, and instead it was nothing but wires and metal. And he would rig it so that it held a baby bottle so that the baby monkey could feed. And his question was, would the baby monkey spend more time with the monkey mother that was feeding it or the monkey mother that was soft and comforting? And what he found is that the monkey spent up to 20 hours a day snuggling on the warm, soft monkey and only went to the wire monkey when they wanted food. So in a sense, what he demonstrated was the primary motivation, a primary need for the infant is this need for warmth and comfort. Now, I'm going to pitch this in sort of a biological context a little bit later, and what I'm going to suggest to you is that the baby has a very undeveloped emotional system. That's why babies cry a lot. So they have this system that creates emotion. Now, what you and I have that stops us from crying is this frontal lobe, which allows us to say, oh, it's not that bad, it's going to be okay, and give ourselves perspective and soothe ourselves so that we don't cry. But little infants don't have this. And when you're crying and afraid, your body is coursing with cortisol, which A, is not good for you, and B, prevents you from exploring. And exploring is a very important thing to do in order to stimulate that brain. So, in order to get the little baby interested in its environment, the baby has to be able to calm down. And what the soft mother does, what the feeling of comfort does for the baby, is it allows the baby to control their emotional response and not have what we call sympathetic nervous responses. Hey, what's up? Yeah, go ahead and check it. No big deal. I got a staff member coming in here to say hello. We're just having a live broadcast today on YouTube, man. You doing all right?
Yes, sir. I'm doing fine. Yourself? How are you?
Fantastic. Okay, so do you understand where we're going with that right now? The idea is this close contact that the baby has with the mom allows it to control this sympathetic nervous response, which allows the baby to be comfortable enough to explore. And the exploration leads to neural growth via sensory stimulation. All right? Now, here's what Harry Harlow found. The attachment is driven by a need for comfort, not for food, just like I described to you. He also found that there is a critical period for attachment. All right? If these babies aren't provided with a warm, soft mother within the first few months of life, when the baby is scared, he would set up experiments where he would scare these monkeys. And the monkeys that were brought up with a warm, soft mother, when he scared them, they would run and jump on the mother, the warm, soft mother. But if he waited and didn't give them a warm, soft mother, and I'm not sure if it was 6 months or a year of their life, he found that when he later scared them, even if there was a warm, soft mother, they wouldn't go to that mother. So it's almost like they didn't have the ability to seek comfort in another human being. Now, if you remember from Wednesday's webinar, we were talking about reactive attachment disorder. One of the findings of reactive attachment disorder is that when children are scared, when RAD children are scared or upset, unlike the rest of us, they do not seek out human comfort. That's part of the attachment disorder. Does that make sense? So he found that there appears to be a critical period for this attachment process in human beings that allows us to develop the ability to receive nurturing and warmth from another human being. And furthermore, he actually found that even the monkeys raised with the soft mother monkey still seemed kind of broken in the sense that they had trouble fitting in with other monkeys. So he would then take these monkeys and put them in with the other monkeys that had been brought up around their mothers, and he found that these monkeys were withdrawn and overly stimulated and terrified. And so I've actually got video I could send you if you want to see this of a little monkey, and it's basically cowering in the corner with its hands over its head while all the other monkeys are running around and playing. So there are serious implications for lack of nurturance at this very important critical period. Was Mary going off of this study for her own? Well, here's the deal. Now I'm going to step to attachment quality, Mel G. It turns out that Mary Ainsworth was a young professor a young talented professor who came to work with the older, more established Bowlby. And she had also done work with neglected children, and she began to develop theories about what might cause children to develop these feelings these feelings, this lack of attachment. And she began interested in seeing if there were systematic differences in how children were attached. So once we know that attachment is important, and we know that neglect will really mess you up, but those are two extremes, somebody that has reactive attachment disorder and then somebody who is perfectly secure. She wanted to see if she could sort of find more subtle differences in attachment styles. Okay, so she was actually looking to sort of explain differences in attachment. And she sort of extended the work that Bowlby started out by sort of finding out the variations in human attachment. Now, her huge claim to fame was the strange situation paradigm. Now, the problem with people who have attachment disorders is that they find it difficult to reestablish attachment. That's why some of them have abandonment issues and don't want people and are afraid people are going to leave them. And sometimes people have intimacy issues and don't want to develop relationships because they're afraid of being hurt. So the problem is that sometimes people have trouble reestablishing contact. Now, when your sweetie pie goes off on vacation, or let's say they have to go away for work for a week or two, what do? You take them to the airport, and right before they go behind the gate, you give them a big hug and let them know, here's the love I have for you. And then they run off and do their thing for a week. And when they come back on the airplane, you know that they're coming back. And when they come back, what's the first thing you do to them again? You hug them again, and you give them a 5 or 6 second hug, and then you let go, and everything's normal because you've reestablished attachment. That's sort of what hugging is all about. It's about reestablishing contact when we meet people. High fives, handshakes, we're reestablishing attachment with these important people in our lives. And so what she found, she believed that you could tell the person's attachment style by how they responded to being reunited with a person that they missed. So in the strange situation paradigm, what she does is she brings a baby into the laboratory and sets up an experiment where the baby is separated from the mother 2 times in a row over a 15-minute period. And the important part of the experiment is what happens when the mother comes back. How easily is the baby able to reestablish contact? Now, if your baby is secure, they should be able to easily reestablish this attachment when you come back in. But she found there were variations in children's ease with which they could calm down when mom leave. Now, if you'll remember from Tuesday, I told you that separation anxiety and separation protest are a very normal part of the development process. So when mom left the room, these babies all cried. They all cried. They demonstrated separation anxiety, which is the fear, and separation protest, which is the behavior. Now, during this experiment, they were separated twice from the mom. And one of those times, she even heightened the fear by putting a stranger in the room. So the mom would actually leave a second time, and there would be the baby alone with a stranger. And you know from yesterday's lecture that children also experience stranger anxiety. So what she did was she put a child in a state of distress 2 times when their mom left, and she wanted to see how easily able those babies were to calm themselves when mom came back in the room. Now, she originally identified 3 attachment styles, which I have listed over here. In the black bold. She found that some babies were securely attached, and these babies, when mom came back in, the baby would immediately hug mom, and as soon as the baby started hugging mom, they would begin to calm down, and they would quickly calm down, and then the baby would restart exploring the room, because when babies feel comfortable, toddlers feel comfortable around their mom, they don't like sitting in mom's lap. Instead, they like to explore really close to mom so they can be learning things but still stay close to that attachment figure. Okay? These were the securely attached babies. She found about 50% of the babies were able to easily calm themselves and begin their exploratory behavior. However, she found about 20% of these babies seemed to be angry at the mom. And even when the mom came back in, these babies continued to cry. They were incredibly distressed, but they seemed angry at their mom, so they wouldn't make eye contact. They would push the mom away. They might swing their arms at mom. They were very, very angry. And she called these avoidant babies. She said that these babies were non-securely attached and that they had an avoidant attachment style. These babies weren't easily comforted, and they were angry with the mother. Now, she found another 20% of them appeared to be sort of, if you will, clingy with the mom. When the mom came back in, they just had trouble they had trouble stopping their crying, but they wouldn't let the mom go, and they couldn't get enough of the mom. They were super duper clingy babies. And she argued that these babies were anxious. She called these babies, actually she called them anxious ambivalent, but we're going to call them resistant babies. And she said that these babies were not easily comforted and had trouble getting out of the mom's lap to explore. And so she sort of identified these three categories of behavior. And she found that 10% of the babies couldn't really be categorized in any of those three patterns. Now, what did she discover about this? She discovered that it appeared that the attachment style was to a large degree dependent upon how sensitive the baby was to the maternal needs during the first year of life. So insecurely attached infants tend to have mothers who were rejecting or inconsistent or emotionally negative during the attachment process. Now, further research has actually looked at attachment styles and how well they predict later outcomes in early childhood and adulthood. And it turns out that securely attached babies tend to show more social competence and less peer conflict and less social anxiety around the early and middle childhood years. So your securely attached babies tend to be more confident preschool and early school kids. It's the anxious ambivalent ones that are going to have more conflict and less trouble fitting in. And research in the 80s and 90s seemed to suggest that your infant attachment style might predict your adult attachment style. So if you've ever had a partner that has security issues, intimacy issues, or abandonment issues, you may find that their relationship style may demonstrate a lot of insecurity and nervousness. And this is sort of predicted by the infant attachment style. Now, you'll notice right below me, I have this really cool model with four lines and 8 arrows. Now, more current research has said, you know what, let's not think of attachment as 3 categories, and instead let's think of it as the intersection of 2 relationship qualities that we all have. All of us, to a certain degree, have a desire for intimacy. Let's call that the opposite of avoidance. So people who are low in avoidance have an interest in developing intimacy with another person. And then people who have difficulty with intimacy maybe are high in their relationship avoidance. So one dimension of your attachment style is the reliance and interest you have in an attachment figure. Let's call that avoidance. All right? And then the other dimension that crosses with that is how comfortable you feel, how likely you feel you are to lose that relationship. So how nervous are you about that relationship being destroyed? And some people are highly anxious about their relationships and always have a fear that their relationships are likely to rupture. And we might say that those people have high relationship anxiety. And then there are some other people who feel more confident about their relationships and don't feel like people are going to abandon them, and they might be called we might say that they have low relationship anxiety. So you can think of attachment style as sort of the avoidance and the relationship anxiety that you have, the relationship avoidance and the relationship anxiety that you have. So people who Ainsworth described as securely attached were low in relationship avoidance and low in relationship anxiety. They liked intimacy and they didn't fear losing intimacy. But the little clingy babies, the clingy babies would be low in avoidance. They really, really, really needed mom, but they didn't feel confident about mom being there. And so they were preoccupied with the relationship. That's the newer term rather than anxious ambivalent anymore. And then you might say that the children who were dismissive in Ainsworth's study would be high in avoidance. They're not interested in getting warmth from a human relationship, and they also really don't care about they don't have a fear of losing the relationship that they're not interested in. So you might call this the dismissive avoidant relationship style. Now, later research has sort of fleshed out this fourth dimension. If you have a dimensional model, you don't have 3 attachment styles, you have 4 now. And so modern attachment research identifies a 4th attachment style they'll call the disorganized attachment style. And these are the children that just seem dazed and confused and avoidant all at the same time. Their behavior is, in a sense, disorganized. And you might see this as sort of the outcome of maybe some of the more difficult and pathological parenting styles. Any questions so far? I've been droning on without letting you ask one question. Uh-oh. Let me get to my chat bar real quick. Danger. Hey, everyone. Okay, hi, Angeline. Good to see you. Good to see you. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the neuroscience. And I left the E. I got a typo here. It's neuroscience with an E and attachment theory. Now, more recent research has sort of tried to, if it is a biological and an innate process that's served by a critical period, then maybe there should be some biological foundations that we can identify. And so developmental neuroscience tries to examine the connections between psychological processes, their development, and the brain. So I will tell you that there are a couple of things that we can think about that can be implicated in the attachment process. All right? Now, there are some brain areas that you will see that are activated during sort of this attachment process. So you've got the HPA axis, which is our fear, our sort of our fear system that we have built into the brain. And for the infant baby, this system is not connected to the prefrontal cortex yet. You don't have myelination. So in a sense, to help this system develop normally and not to build abnormal pathways, in a sense, the nurturing of the mom helps control this emotional center so that it can develop normally in the child. Okay? And then your book implicates the reward centers, especially in the mom. Now, all of us in our brain have a reward center that's controlled by structures such as the nucleus accumbens, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. And whenever you do something that you like, if you win a contest, if somebody tells you they love you, if you get a like on your social media, if you do drugs, you have a reward center in your brain which registers the pleasure of this event. And people who have addictive personalities or people who develop addictions take drugs that chronically activate this reward axis that we have. And one of the things that research does show is that when moms engage in nurturing behavior, this causes the release of dopamine in their systems, and the release of oxytocin increases the mothering behaviors that then increase the release of the dopamine-like behavior. So in a sense, moms do get a high from this nurturing behavior, the positive feedback from the baby, because they're so doggone cute and they have that social smile. These visual cues reward the mother's brain, which causes her to engage in these maternal behaviors. Because you might ask, how did mothers always know to take care of their babies? Well, it's built into the system. It feels good to them. And the release of oxytocin actually improves the mothering behavior. So you get this sort of circuit that improves the behavior, which then improves the rewards, and it sort of builds on itself, and it causes moms to be willing and interested in taking care of babies. Now, it turns out that research has actually shown that men do produce oxytocin, not as much, but the research suggests that fathers who engage in more affectionate parenting actually increase experience an increase in this feel-good oxytocin or love hormone that we have. And research has actually shown you can go the other way, and if you inject men with oxytocin, they engage in more optimal parenting behaviors. So attachment, if it's biological, there definitely has to be a brain circuit that sort of drives it. Now, criticisms of attachment theory. Attachment theory, a lot of it is non-experimental. If you think about it, John Bowlby's work was case studies. Harry Harlow's work was experimental, but it was monkeys. Mary Ainsworth was largely just an observational study. She didn't really manipulate anything. So there are some alternate explanations and critiques that do exist for attachment theory. Now, one of the things, problems that's noted with attachment theory is that it doesn't seem to, this theory as developed with the idea that it's one parent, primarily a mom, for one infant. This is sort of a culturally bound theory. And there are lots of different family and system cultural organizations around the world where babies aren't necessarily taken care of by one parent at one time. Sometimes it's older brothers and sisters. Sometimes it might be multiple adults. And there are all different kinds of cultural systems. And yet, attachment appears to develop all across the globe, that securely attached children appear to develop even if they're brought up by brothers and sisters or fathers or aunts and uncles. So there are lots of differences in how children are raised, and yet a lot of children tend to turn out as securely attached. Now, if you look at the picture that I have below here, there are also differences in cultural patterns of attachment. If it's a universal pattern, then we should see similarities in patterns of attachment across the world. Now, what you will see is that secure attachment tends to occur about 50% of the time, no matter where you go in the world. But if you look in different cultures, what you're going to see are different kinds of non-secure attachments. So in the more collectivistic Japanese culture, you're going to see less babies who are avoidant and more babies who are clingy. In Eastern Bloc countries like Germany, you're going to see less clingy and more avoidant babies. So there are, than you will see in the United States. So there are cultural variations too, which don't really fit with a biological explanation. All right. Now, there is also research to suggest that maybe genes can be implicated in attachment style. Maybe it's not the mother's behavior all the time. Maybe some children were born to be avoidant. And the reason that their mother treats them in an avoidant way, is because the mother has the gene as well. So what we think of as a product of environment is just a genetic environmental correlation, right? Now, in comparing adult outcomes, sure, you can identify attachment styles, but how well does it compare against infant temperament in predicting early childhood and adult outcomes? And it turns out that there seems to be a lot more research supporting the relationship between inhibition and impulse control in adult outcomes compared to attachment style. And you know what? Research also suggests that these outcomes that we find may not be tied to just the attachment experience in infancy, but maybe a product of attachment anytime. So maybe just having good bonds at 18 months or 18 years of age matters. So maybe it's attachment isn't a critical period thing. Maybe it's a human relationship thing. We can think of close bonds with other people as sort of a protective factor against the effect of stress. So is attachment really a critical period, or is just having good relationships important at any point in your life? And you know what? There's even research to suggest that traumatic events later in childhood, like divorce or death of a parent, actually has a bigger effect on adult outcomes than attachment style. And maybe attachment is just one step in a cascading of process. So remember, I suggested to you that we have sort of this biological and then these environmental effects and then biological and environmental effects. Maybe attachment is just a smaller part of a larger cascade and it is not of primary importance like Bowlby and Ainsworth and Harlow would have argued. Does anybody have any questions about the lecture today? We had a smaller crowd than normal and a quieter crowd than normal. I hope everything made sense. Thank you very much for coming this week. I'm going to stay on the line a couple of minutes to answer questions in the chat bar if anybody does. Otherwise, I'm going to end this broadcast, say goodbye to you. Don't forget to do the homework that's due on Sunday. And remember, your discussion board is due on Friday. If you didn't come to the webinar, you need to do the discussion to get credit. If you want extra credit, you need to do the discussion board as well. So take care. It was good seeing you, and I'll talk to you again next week.